Hey guys, can everybody hear me? Sort of.
Yeah, I got you on my end, man.
Yeah, you're good.
Good. All right. So I guess we'll I don't know how far in depth you guys want to go. We're gonna do mostly like a lot of intro stuff. Kind of go over some of the bows themselves and differences. And then we'll go into kind of like the tuning and pre-tuning stuff that I kind of go through. So you guys know about all like the different kinds of stops, the difference between like a hybrid bow and 2-track or dual track, or now they call them the tri-track on the newest ones. You guys want me to go over that stuff, or I think we're pretty good? Just trying to gauge. All right, we'll run through it. So I'm gonna grab a bow. All right. You guys see this bow? Pretty good. So this is an expedition. Okay. Can you guys see how I have the yokes, they call them, that split off around the cam, and they go on the outside of the limb?
Yeah.
Okay, so this bow only has it on the top cam, nothing on the bottom. It's just everything is attached to the cam, nothing's outside. So this is a hybrid style bow, right? Yoke's only on one side, could be the top, could be the bottom. You'll see this, like Hoyt up until this year has always run the hybrid systems on their hunting bows. Expedition, Obsession had the Turmoil that was like that, right? So this is a hybrid bow, and it has the yokes. Bowtech, like your Prodigy and everything before, those bows would have a yoke on the top and the bottom. So pretty much up until they had the new system, it would be yoke on the top and yoke on the bottom, right? And then we have something like, I actually don't have, like the Matthews, right? This isn't a dual track, but this does not have a yoke on the top or the bottom. Ignore this is my rest, right? This just goes around by the limb. The differences with these are, we have anything that has the yoke system, you can tune it by adding pressure on the yokes. So you would put the bow in the vise and you would use the press, and you would shift the pressure on the limbs by twisting or untwisting the yokes. If there's no yokes, in this case, so Matthews has the top hats, this is where you're actually moving the cam left and right to fix tears or to fix any issues left and right. The top hat system, Obsession and Elite, they have shims in there. Again, before the Cure has a whole different type of system to it. But if it doesn't have yokes, you have to move the cams for tuning. Then we have, so on the Matthews, right? We have, I know this is really basic, but we have our string, right? And then we have our cables. Our cables are going to be where we adjust our timing. They're going to be the primary source for adjusting our axle to axle length. that's also going to come into factor when we measure the brace height, right? So the brace height is that distance from the grip, the throat of the grip, to the string, okay? We can use everything from measuring the axle, center of the axle to center of the axle, and the brace height to get into what you would call like the factory spec. That's usually your starting point. If you were going to get really crazy, there's certain tolerances that it'll go from there. But when we start tuning, when we want to get as close as we can, right off the bat, we'll check our axle to axle length and we'll check our brace height. The Matthews and Hoyt's PSE Bowtech, they use a cable stop. So they have a little piece on the cam that when it rotates, it's going to come around and it's going to hit the cable. The Expedition I just had has a limb stop. So again, it's going to have a peg on the cam. When the bow is drawn, cam rotates and it's going to stop up against the limb. A limb stop is going to give you a very, very hard and solid back wall. So when you draw, if you're pulling really hard, you're going to slam into that back wall and it's going to be an immediate stop. The cable stops are a little bit softer. Sometimes even if you're at full draw and you pull a little bit harder, you'll feel it flex because it'll shift and bend into the cable. Just some things that we'll go over with kind of like how the bow itself works. So at rest, we have all the poundage pretty much on the string, and we have very little weight on the cables. If you look, I can grab the cable, you can move it pretty far. You can really, with not much force, kind of rotate the cam and move it. That's because when the bow's at rest, most of the load is on the string. As you draw back, what happens is you're transferring the load from the string onto the cables. Okay? When you're at full draw, you'll see, guys, you can kind of grab the string and almost twist it with your hand. That's because the load is going to be off of the string and now it's going to be shifted to the cables. I don't know how many guys have ever seen it, but if you fail to put limb stops back in, you'll draw the bow back and it'll go to 100% let off. All the load will transfer to the cables, and the only way to get it out of that situation is to get it in the press the limbs further, take the string and the cables off, and reset the bow. The nice thing with cable stops is you never really have to worry about that. They don't come off. They're generally attached right to the cam, and they are a requirement because they are usually on the mod that you're using. So this is the VXR. This has the switch weight mods. If you didn't have the mod on there, which has the cable stop, you wouldn't be able to draw this bow back. But on the Expedition, I got two of them. Can you guys see that little peg up in the top there?
Mm-hmm.
So this peg can be taken out, and usually you would loosen it, but using this peg, you can adjust the let off that you have. You can decrease or increase let off, which will change again, like the valley. That's that point where you hit your max weight and then it starts to let off. The valley is where the load transfers to the cables, and now that string has very little weight on it. If you fail to put one of these back in and you draw back, the cam will rotate so far that 100% of the weight will shift to the cables. So if you're ever working on these types of bows, it is very, very, very important to make sure that your limb stop goes back in before you put it on a draw board or you draw it back. I can tell you personally that nothing is really scarier than drawing one of these back and it going to 100% let off and the string just falls to the floor when you shoot. It is one of those things that'll make your butthole close fast enough to cut a cigar. So that being said, it's very important on mine, whenever I do it, especially when I tune it, you'll see this little silver mark on the limb. That's the point that it lines up with. The reason I say this is if you look at how close that is to the limb, you can't put these bows in a press unless you have special fingers. And if you don't have the finger, you have to take the peg off. Right? Any